Hi, this is the demo video for the inverted pose bake mode for our sequence baker plugin for Unreal Engine. To get started, we want to just show you what the inverted pose actually does by default inside of Unreal Engine. So here we have our animation clip, which is our run animation running on Manny, and we're just going to have to add a layered control rig on top of this animation sequence here. So when we have a layered control rig added to the sequencer, when we right click, we have this option that gets revealed called Bake Inverted Pose. So if we run this, we'll see that it bakes it down, but it also doesn't give you any options to control how we want to bake down in terms of what frame range and etc. So we can see what happens now is normally a layered control rig is an additive operation. When we bake to the inverted pose, it essentially looks at all the controls and figures out what is the negative transform values we need to apply to get it back to the bind pose here. So you can see that as we scrub across, although we originally had this animation clip running, it's going through each frame and each pose of this animation clip and doing the inverted transforms on each one of them. So if we see here, if we disable the animation track, we'll get something goofy that looks like this. Because what is running on here now is essentially a subtractive animation track that's running in the inside the control rig as a layered control rig, and it's subtracting the anim sequence here. So because we have the anim sequence disabled, it's actually subtracting the transforms on the bind pose. So if we enable it back, it goes back to the bind pose. So where this is important to use is that if you want to bake out specific animations to neutralize or to isolate and use different masking scenarios, and you can bake it out to have subtractive animations rather than additive animations. So where this is, although this is helpful, the default behavior is very limited. As we showed just now, it bakes it only to the specific frame ranges within these handles, and you can't bake subsections or do custom operations on them. So to make this a bit more dynamic, we've added some additional features to our tool to make this a little simpler to work with. So on top of our standard features, we have our auto update from sequencer selection that we've shown in other videos as well. So you don't necessarily have to know which control rig to be using, because when we select it, it's going to look at the skeletal mesh and look at the default rig and automatically populate it in. And one other note to realize is that because we are using a layered control rig as the requirement, whichever control rig that we do choose and end up using needs to have a backward solve. If it doesn't have a backward solve, it will not be a valid candidate to use for the inverted pose. So with this selected, as we change our selections inside of our sequencer, the control rig will automatically populate, which is what we want. So similarly to the other features that we showed with the disabled post-process blueprint, we generally want to keep this enabled so that we're not having the post-process animation affecting our backward solve when we're running the bake operation. So on the next thing we want to do is we want to keep the animation track as active. So right now when we are baking, the default behavior is to keep it active. In some weird cases, if you do want to have it disabled, you can uncheck this and it will automatically disable it when we are baking down. So as an example, we're just going to keep this unchecked, and then we're going to do our bake here. And we can see that we have our bake out animation and we have the track as disabled. And if we re-enable it, we get our bind pose back. All right. And similarly to the bake in other bake sections, if we did this manually, you'll see that we have a bake that is happening to the unbounded range for negative infinity and positive infinity. So we're going to do this bake again here, inverted pose. And you'll see that although the keys are within the frame range here, we have negative infinity and positive infinity for the handles here. So rather than having it run throughout the entire range, we have this option here to trim start and to trim the end. So now if we bake, so right with this selected, it will be trimmed and only be active from the start and end frame that we've defined in our bake range here from 0 to 57. All right, so you can see that it's active and then deactive within this range. So similarly to the FK and the standard control rig, we have the ability to bake to selective controls as well as custom masking for subtractive animations, in this case for inverted pose. So what we're going to do is in this next section, we're going to uncheck bake to all controls, and we're going to choose the ability to mask. So we can also remove excluded control channels as well. So from here, we have a predefined control group that we created before, which is for the upper body. And we're just going to add this to our list here. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to leave this as is. We have the upper body for the included controls for our subtractive animation bake. So when we hit bake now, and we scrub here, it's all right, let's just do this once more without the masking. We're going to do the masking later as an example. So if we do this with the masking on here, you'll see that we've subtracted out the upper body and we preserved the lower body as the pose in here. And similarly to the other modes, when we use remove excluded control channels here, you'll see that we only have the control channels of the mask that we chose. So if we did this and we remove this, uncheck this remove extra excluded control channels, and we do the bake again, we'll have all our control channels, except we won't have keys on them for the relevant channels. But in this case, you can see that we may get some weird results because it is a subtractive animation. And if we do have values, although they're 0 for the extra channels, we won't have a nice clean subtractive animation. So ideally, if you are using this feature, we want to keep this remove excluded channels checked off so that when we are baking, we have this nice clean subtractive animation here coming out. All right, so similarly to the other sections, we're going to show how to mask. So when we are masking, generally we want to keep this as well. We're going to show another case with it off as well for the completeness. But we're going to use one animation clip, and we're going to do a split bake that is happening to mask, and we're going to be masking out the upper body into one layer and the rest into a separate layer. So coming out of here, we still see that it is still in bind pose, but we have two separate sets of controls, one for the lower body, bring this out here, and one for the upper body that is included in our control set here. So if we disable one or the other, you'll see that we have a mask animation for just the neutralization of the upper body. And if we look at the inverse, we have a mask animation that is subtracting the lower body. And this is exactly the same scenario as our demo that we did with standard control rig, but in this case, we have subtractive animations coming out from the inverted pose rather than additive transformations coming out from the control rig. Similarly, we can also do this in a more advanced scenario with multiple animation clips to do a masked inverted bake. So we come here, we follow the same example that we used before. We're going to add our jump animation, and we're going to expand this out. And to make this distinct, we're going to rename our animation track to first animation and hit refresh here so that we know we're masking off the upper body as part of the subtractive in the first pass. And it's going to use the jump as the second pass for the mask subtraction. So if we come here and we do the bake, we'll see that this looks a bit goofy, but because it's running two subtractives on two clips. So what we're going to do to make this more clear is we're going to mute both of these as well as these guys, and we're going to turn them on one at a time. So for example, if we have our run animation, and then we take our subtractive, which should be this one, you'll see that we still have the subtractive of the upper body that was run first, and all we have left is the legs of the run animation. And similarly, if we take a look at the inverse, we have our jump animation, and then we have the inverse select controls. So now we have just the upper body of the jump animation in this mask. So although we can't easily visualize this, we have the ability to bake these out as separate anim sequence clips for custom blend scenarios. If we want to isolate animations for just the upper body or the lower body in a different context using subtractive animations for the inverted bake. And to just demo one last feature, just because we want to show that we can do custom frame ranges, we're going to delete what we have here as an example. We're going to select here, and rather than using the full frame range, we're going to use a custom frame range. Let's say we go from 15 to 30. And then now if we do our bake here to all controls, we'll see that we have the inverted bake just for the frame range of 15 to 30, which is normally not doable with the default setup. So we can see here now it's using the animation clip only when it's driving from before 15. And then once it enters here, it's neutralized the inverted pose, which is the negative transforms of the animation clip. And then it comes back into the animation clip. So with this setup, you can do custom bakes if you have selective scenarios where you don't want to bake the whole range, and you can neutralize the pose for any given frame range. So this should open up all the possibilities that you could technically need for additive or subtractive animation blending inside of Unreal Engine. All right, thanks.